There is a train platform in Tokyo where every morning hundreds of people stand for exactly 4 minutes waiting for the same train, at the same time, in the same spot. No one is on their phone scrolling to numb the wait. No one is sighing, checking the time every 10 seconds, or radiating the quiet frustration you'd expect from a delayed commute. Many of them look, if anything, calm, some almost peaceful, as though 4 minutes of standing still were not an inconvenience to be survived but simply another part of the day. Meanwhile, somewhere else right now, someone is standing in a slow-moving line, phone in hand, refreshing an app they've already refreshed 6 times, feeling the specific ichi restlessness that comes from having nothing to do and nowhere to put that discomfort. Same basic experience, completely different relationship to it. What if the difference between these two people has almost nothing to do with patience as a personality trait, and almost everything to do with 7 small habits of attention? Each one quiet enough that it barely feels like a technique at all. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what those 7 habits are, and why they can make waiting rooms, lines, and dead time feel different as early as your next wait. Before we walk through the habits themselves, we need to address an assumption almost everyone carries into a moment of waiting. The assumption is this: boredom is simply empty time, an absence of stimulation that needs to be filled as quickly as possible, usually with a phone. This feels obvious, but it creates a strange trap, because the more consistently empty time gets filled with stimulation, the less tolerance the mind builds for any stillness at all. Which makes the next unfilled moment feel even more unbearable than the last. The actual issue was never the empty time itself. It's the belief that empty time is a problem that needs solving. This is the piece almost every productivity framework quietly skips. The real Japanese term ma, the meaningful pause or interval between things, a concept applied in traditional Japanese art, music, and architecture, where the empty space is treated not as absence but as an active, valuable part of the whole. The practice, rather than treating a gap in activity as a void to escape, it is treated as a legitimate part of the experience itself. The same way a rest in a piece of music is understood as sound's necessary partner rather than its interruption. The scientific validation. Cognitive researchers studying attention have found that unstructured mental downtime activates what's known as the brain's default mode network, a state linked to memory consolidation, creative problem-solving, and emotional processing, meaning the empty moment is doing quiet cognitive work the entire time. The second habit concerns where attention gets directed during a wait. The real Japanese term, kansha, gratitude, specifically the practice of noticing small, ordinary details rather than scanning for something to complain about. The practice, instead of mentally cataloging the inconvenience of the wait, attention is redirected towards small sensory details nearby, the pattern of tile on the floor, the particular quality of light through a window, the sound of distant traffic. The scientific validation. Studies on attention and mood have found that shifting focus towards small external sensory details during idle time reliably lowers self-reported irritability compared to unfocused mental drifting. Because sensory attention occupies the same cognitive channels that would otherwise generate restless, repetitive thoughts. The third habit is about how the body itself is held during a wait. The real Japanese term, shisei, posture, understood not merely as physical alignment but as a quiet expression of one's internal state. The practice, rather than slumping or fidgeting, an upright, settled posture is maintained, weight balanced evenly, hands still, breath unhurried. Treating the waiting body the same way it would be treated during a moment considered important. The scientific validation. Research in embodied cognition has shown that posture doesn't just reflect emotional state, it actively shapes it, meaning an upright, settled physical position measurably reduces the physiological stress markers associated with restlessness compared to a slumped, fidgety one. The fourth habit involves the pace of breath during idle moments. The real Japanese term, kokyuu, breath, specifically the practice of lengthening the exhale slightly longer than the inhale during otherwise unremarkable moments. The practice, rather than breathing shallow and fast, as boredom and mild frustration tend to produce, breath is deliberately slowed, particularly on the exhale. Without turning it into a formal meditation session, just a quiet background adjustment. The scientific validation. Physiological research has consistently shown that a longer exhale relative to inhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest-and-digest state, directly counteracting the mild sympathetic activation, the fight-or-flight arousal, that restlessness and boredom typically produce. The fifth habit is about the framing of time itself. The real Japanese term, ikai go ikai, one time, one meeting, the idea that any given moment, including a mundane one, will never occur in exactly this form again. The practice, a wait is treated not as a repeatable, disposable block of time, but as a genuinely unrepeated moment, which shifts its emotional weight from time being wasted to time simply passing. As it always does, the scientific validation. Research on temporal framing has found that people who frame ordinary moments as unique rather than interchangeable report significantly less impatience and higher moment-to-moment life satisfaction. Likely because uniqueness naturally increases attentional engagement rather than dismissal. The sixth habit concerns what the mind is allowed to do during idle time, rather than what it's forced to avoid. The real Japanese term boya, a soft, almost affectionate term for gentle, unfocused daydreaming, generally viewed without the guilt often attached to wasting time in more productivity-driven cultures. The practice, rather than treating a wandering mind during a wait as a failure of discipline, it is allowed to drift without correction. Understanding that forcing focus during genuinely unstimulating moments often backfires anyway. The scientific validation. Neuroscience research on mind wandering has found that permitted, unforced daydreaming is associated with lower reported boredom intensity than daydreaming that is constantly interrupted by self-correction or guilt. Because the act of fighting the wandering mind consumes more cognitive energy than the wandering itself. The seventh and final habit is the simplest, and it happens the moment the wait ends. The real Japanese term, kiriki, a clean switch, the deliberate practice of fully closing one mental state before opening the next, rather than carrying restlessness forward into whatever comes after. The practice, a brief, conscious moment is taken to acknowledge that the waiting period is over before immediately diving into the next task, rather than dragging residual irritation from the wait directly into the following activity. The scientific validation. Cognitive psychologists studying task switching have found that an explicit closing moment between mental states reduces what's called attention residue, the lingering mental noise from a previous state that impairs focus and mood in the state that follows. As you've seen, making waiting and boredom disappear has very little to do with finding better ways to fill empty time. It has to do with 7 quiet habits of attention practiced during the moments most people try to escape. Treat the pause itself as meaningful through ma. Redirect attention outward through kansha. Hold the body steady through shisei. Slow the breath through kokyuu. Frame the moment as unrepeatable through ikai go ikai. Let the mind wander without guilt through boya. And close each wait cleanly through kiriki. None of it requires more patience as a trait. It requires a slightly different relationship with the empty moments you already have. If this changed the way you think about your next wait, please like this video and subscribe so we can continue unlocking this kind of practical Japanese wisdom together. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 7 habits are you going to try during your next boring moment? Leave it in the comments below. Until the next video.